Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. It was revealed on Trend Mood that Too Faced will be launching a Palm Springs Dreams palette, and this is it right here. It is a combination of neutrals, some colorful shades. It's a very Too Faced palette. I was trying to think of an adjective. It's a very Too Faced palette. You have a few pops of color, but most of the colors are neutral, and some of the colors, you can even remember seeing some of the colors in other palettes. And I think, I'm just going to get right into it, I think that that's one of the issues that I see with this palette, because it looks so similar to other palettes that Too Faced has been launching. And I basically just filmed my look inspired by the Too Faced Palm Springs Dreams palette, and that video went up yesterday. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys my redesign, and what I did is I just tinkered around with the palette a little bit, I switched it up, and I decided to basically create a new version of what I think the palette should have been. This is, of course, me giving an alternate opinion. I'm not trying to bash on Too Faced's launch in any way, shape, or form. I'm just giving you guys my alternate opinion and a visual aid to supplement that. So I think I'll have the before palette here and the after palette here. So on the screen right now you can see how my redesign looks a little bit similar to the palette that Too Faced is planning to launch, but it does have some other colors in it. I definitely switched it up a lot. So in today's video, we're going to dive into each and every single shade in this palette, in the original palette and my redesign. I'm going to compare and contrast, and I'm also going to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek into my process and my reasoning behind making the changes that I did make. The thing that I didn't like about this palette is that it looks so very similar to other palettes that Too Faced has launched. If you look at the comment section on Trend Mood's post, people compare it to the white chocolate palette, the gingerbread palette. It looks so very similar, and I definitely remember seeing like a few of these colors, for example, in the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette, which is, I think, the only Too Faced palette that I ever bought. And I actually would bring that palette out and show it to you guys so we can compare. But I did declutter that palette, and I did end up giving it to somebody who I can guarantee is enjoying it a lot more than I ever did. And if you look at my redesign just overall, you can see that some of the shades are relatively similar. I did not want to change the palette entirely because I did want to keep Too Faced's customer in mind, and I also want to stay true to the style and the theme that they tend to go for whenever it comes to their launches. The thing is, I've noticed that a lot of Too Faced palettes have a very specific set of neutrals within the palette, and they also like to interject that with a few pops of color, which is fine. However, I find that I wanted to adjust that a little bit by keeping some of the neutrals and adding a lot more pops of color. But these pops of color, in my opinion, are pops of color that can be worn with the neutrals or simply on their own. So anyway, let's just get started and let me show you in depth what I did for my redesign and how I changed things and how I kept things the same. So something that I definitely did keep the same was the entire top row of the palette. If you look at the original palette on the side of the screen, you will see that the top row of neutrals, that bone white matte shade, that sort of like pinky kind of transition color, that shimmery brown, and that mid-tone brown, I basically kept those unchanged, and you can see those in my new mock-up right here. So the reason I did that is because I wanted to, again, stay true to what Too Faced usually does with their palettes, and basically like keep those neutrals, because I did want to keep some of the original theme of the palette, and I felt like if I had taken away that row or replaced it with some other shades, it wouldn't have looked like a Too Faced palette. However, let's move on to the next row down with the color Rum Tiki. I don't know what that is. Is that like a drink? I have no idea. But this is a color that was originally a shade that was very much a transition color. It was a mid-tone, sort of lightish transition color, which would be fine in my opinion if we didn't already have a transition color in the top row already, which we do. And the two colors are actually very similar. The only difference is that the one in the top row actually has a little bit more pink in it. I wanted to change this color from a neutral and transform it into a lavender, like purpley pinkish color. I don't even know what to call this color in general because it is kind of pink, but then it's kind of purple. It's kind of like, it definitely has a lot of blue tones in it. And you will see as we move forward with the rest of the palette that I redesigned, this ties into the other shades in the palette, but I felt like this would be an interesting alternate transition color. It's still a color that could work as a transition color, but it's definitely more unique than the color that was there beforehand. Next up, I want to talk about Swizzle Stick. Now, Swizzle Stick originally was a color that was kind of like a muted version of a cranberry mid-tone color. I just felt like it wasn't very, I just didn't really want that in a palette. I think Palm Springs, and I don't think a color that is quite like that, you know? So I wanted to brighten it, so I basically upped the saturation. I added some more magenta to it, and I basically made it into an almost look of a neon hot pink shade. This is something that I think would pair beautifully with Rum Tiki, the color that we mentioned beforehand, and I feel like these two colors would correspond brilliantly. Then I have Last Call. Now, if you initially just look at these two palettes, you would think that I maybe didn't really make a lot of changes to Last Call, if any, but in fact I did up the saturation slightly, and I added more blue to it because I wanted to make this color a metallic pinkish peachish. I wanted to make this color into a metallic pinky peachy color, but I still wanted to make it like a lavender blue flip. So I feel like the new and improved version of Last Call has two purposes. It is a good companion shade to the pink colors in this palette, but it's also a shade that manages to act as a good accompaniment, big word, to the blue shade in the palette, because if you look at both palettes, they both include a pop of blue, and in the original palette, I felt like that pop of blue, it just was sitting there. There wasn't much to add to it. It just was a blue that wasn't doing much, and I feel like this is like a trend that we had in 2018 and we managed to carry it in 2019, applying a pop of blue into a palette and calling it a day. I feel like it makes blue seem like a relatively unwearable color when you do that, but if you have colors in the palette that tie into that blue, it sort of makes that blue look a little bit more of a color that you can team up with the rest of the shades in that palette. I actually decided to switch the placement of the colors in this palette around a bit because I felt like I wanted to make this look more of a cohesive palette, and just including that blue in that corner was not working for me. So essentially the blue that you see in the original palette, what I did is I brightened it, I upped the saturation, I added some more blue to it, and I essentially made it into this color, and I also moved it up in the palette. So it's definitely a shade that I think is very much improved. It's more of a fun, vivid blue. I do not necessarily like the muted version of this blue that they have in this palette. I feel like it's just lackluster, to be honest, and I did not want that. Moving on, I want to talk about Dirty Martini. Oh my goodness. I wanted to add a neon green into this palette, okay? I felt like that would sort of fit the theme of Palm Springs. I felt like it worked, and I also, I love the combination right now of green and pink. So yes, this was me adding my own little twist to things. I made this essentially a lime green. Do they have limes in Dirty Martinis? I have no idea. But this is just like a color that I felt like would be so fun and so interesting. And by the way, I haven't really mentioned it that much, but I was sort of inspired by the 80s when I was creating this palette as well. I can't believe I haven't mentioned that. But I was inspired kind of by the 80s when I was recreating this palette or redesigning this palette. and I wanted to include some bright colors in here for that reason, and also because I wanted to make this palette more fun. But I felt like that bright, vivid, neon lime green would add so much to this palette. It could be an inner corner highlight because of how metallic it is. It could also be worn all over the lid. It could be like just worn with the orange shades in this palette that you'll see later, the blue, and it can also be worn with the pink, not to mention the neutrals as well. Buzzkill was originally a buzzkill, so I decided to make it a light orange, and you might be thinking, okay, that's okay. See, the thing is, the color next to it that you'll see later is like an orange color, right? And I was like, okay, so we have the orange that is right next to the blue, and what? Like, how, like, I felt like it would just match or correspond rather to the orange that's right next to it. It's a very light orange color. It's kind of, like, it's really fun, really metallic, really pretty in my personal opinion. I feel like this would be beautiful in the inner corner. It would be such a fun color to use. And I mean, the color that was there beforehand, it was not bad, but I wanted to take it into a different direction. I mean, because I just personally didn't necessarily care for that color, so I wanted to change it up. Next is Mocktail. Now for Mocktail, what I basically did is I simply upped the saturation. I transformed it from a color that was an orange to a color that was an orange, you know what I mean? So I'm very happy with that decision. I felt like it added to the palette really nicely, and I just feel like it just corresponds to so many of the other colors in this palette as well. And now we have that color in the palette that is essentially a pink transition color, like a light pink transition color. Like, oh my goodness, how many transition colors can we have in palettes? We have too many transition colors in palettes, people, and I basically decided to make it a yellow. Am I obsessed with yellow right now? Yes. Did that compel me to add yellow to virtually every single redesign that I've been doing lately? Yes. Is this redesign an exception? No. So I just decided to add a yellow into this palette. This time this is more of a golden yellow. It's definitely one that I see that would look good with pretty much every single color in this palette, especially with the orange colors, because I feel like the orange colors would pair so well with the yellow, and that combination would do really well with the neutrals in the top row. So I feel like this entire palette, I mean, you have a lot of different pops of color in here. It's really colorful, but I feel like my redesign, it's a really ambitious, colorful palette, but at the same time, you do have the basics in there. You can still create a neutral look, which is something that I think Too Faced likes to have in their palettes. But I definitely will say that this palette, the original Too Faced palette, the Palm Springs Dreams palette, is just not a palette that I consider to be one of my favorite new releases whatsoever. But I am quite happy to say that the redesign transformed it into a palette that I would actually love to have in my collection. I would love to see this palette in real life. It would be wonderful. But yeah. Anyway, that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching and joining me for today's video. If you haven't seen yesterday's video, in which I basically took the Palm Springs Dream palette and I created a look inspired by it, it'll be in the cards for your enjoyment. If you're interested in seeing more of my redesigns, there will also be a playlist in the cards for your enjoyment as well. I love doing redesigns, and on my channel we are always doing redesigns. At this point, I think I'm just doing redesigns weekly, because every time like a new palette comes out that has any sort of like noteworthiness attached to it, I like to do a redesign on it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye guys.